bless him and his descendants with, which is going to be the Canaan land, he obeyed. Look over in chapter 15. Chapter 15, we'll start verse 1. After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. And Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I am childless, and the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is mine heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, talking about Ishmael, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. And he brought forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness. So we see that he trusted God's promises when he was without a seed, without this seed of promise that was going to be Isaac. And he said, not only am I going to bless you with a literal seed, but also it's going to be something that is going to be the portion of the promise I made to you in chapter 12 before you departed from Haran, and that is going to be whom through these blessings flow, this blessing of the great nation, the physical nation, the land promise, and then obviously the seed promise. So we see that he believed in the Lord, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, so he obeyed again. Look in chapter 17, verse 1. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God, walk before me and be thou perfect. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee. And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee and their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. So this is the circumcision covenant. And if you look over verse 24, and Abram was 90 years old and 9, and when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And so we see this covenant is entered in with God because of Abraham's display of faithfulness over and over. It's not a one-time thing. He's seen that this man has proved himself faithful in all that he's done, and he once again obeyed. Look over in chapter 18. God also chose Abraham because he knew, based on the faithful pattern that he had set forth, that he was one that not only would obey himself, but would also command his household to obey God as well. Genesis 18, verse 18. Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. And for I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord, to do justice and judgment, and the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he had spoken of him. So God understood that Abraham was not a man that was going to fall short, to stop short of what he was called to do. He had portrayed a lifestyle of faithfulness for many years, and was going to continue to do so, and he was going to, obviously that's imperative to what we're looking at tonight in the life of Isaac. He was going to train up his children in the ways of the Lord, although different from the system we're under today, and a very important principle that we'll get a little more into as we progress in some practical application. Flip over to chapter 22. I'll give one more example. Genesis 22 and verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham, he said, Behold, here I am. He said, Take now thine son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon the mountains which I will tell of thee. Now we looked at this last time, and we know that he was commanded to offer the son of promise, Isaac, and he was faithfully to the point of piercing him with the sword, with the knife, and God provided a sacrifice for him. So Abraham had presented a lifestyle, a pattern of faithfulness to God, of obedience, that is something that is very important as we progress in the lifestyle of Isaac and the things that he was going to have to do. And so in chapter 24, flip over to chapter 24. Actually, we'll go to chapter 15 first, sorry. Look back in chapter 15. So the faithfulness of Abraham is something that we certainly need to understand in the way that he would have taught his son. He would have raised up his son. And so looking at the life of Isaac as our focus, we understand that Isaac knew that he was the son of promise. Now, whether he knew exactly what all that entails, That is not, I can't say that one way or the other for sure, but he would have known that he was part of that promise, and through him, those blessings that God had told him were going to be fulfilled. And as a result of that, there's always a contingency, a conditional relationship with God. If you do this, then I will bless you. And so he would have known that there was faithfulness expected to him. I said chapter 15, look in chapter 17. Chapter 17, in reference to this son of promise, in verse 15. And God said unto Abraham, As for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but thou shalt call her name, but Sarah shall her name be. And I will bless her, and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old, and shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abraham said unto God, Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. So he would have understood this promise that God made not only to Abraham, but also to Sarah and to his mother, and the expectation that would be associated therewith. Look over in chapter 18 again. We just read this verse, but just for sake of now that we're focusing more on Isaac and off of Abraham, in light of what he would have been expected to do in reference to the obedience associated with God's promises and blessings. Chapter 18 and verse 19. Again, this is about Abraham and how he would command his house. For I know him that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abram that which he has spoken of him. So Abraham understood the serious nature of God and the reverence that he had for God and the blessings that were associated with him. And so this is not something that he was going to take lightly in reference to how his children were to behave and raised up in his house and how they were to go about their business. So he would have set forth an example of faithfulness in his own lifestyle, but obviously he would have expected his children to do the same. Flip over to chapter 22. He was a faithful father that, as we see in Ephesians 6:4, raised his children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Obviously, again, a different law system, different laws in regards to what they were expected to do to be pleasing unto God, but nonetheless, we know that faith cometh by hearing, hearing by the word of God, and we'll see in just a second that Abraham had faith, Isaac had faith. They're both listed as well as Jacob in that hall of faith in Hebrews chapter 11. But in chapter 22, an example of that, knowing that he was obedient, knowing that he was familiar with God's will and what God wanted from them. Look in verse 5. This is the example we just talked about Abraham being tested of God, trying to prove his faith to God that he would sacrifice his son. And we'll see that Isaac understood the necessity of what was, with the specific, not the necessity, of worship in this context. So look in verse 5. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder up and worship, and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father? And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? So Isaac knew exactly what was required for them to properly worship God. He knew about the wood, he knew about the fire, he knew about the knife, but he's saying, where's the lamb that we're going to sacrifice? And so obviously God was going to supply that through providence for Abraham's faithfulness to spare Isaac and him be that portion of that fulfillment of the seed promise. But again, it's one of those things that by example, the call that we have and the responsibility we have as parents to train up our children, whether they fully grasp what we're doing in worship, whether they fully grasp what we're doing in Bible class, you would be shocked at what they can learn just by seeing your example, seeing how we worship, seeing that it's important to us, seeing that there's this many people here on a Wednesday night. That was something in a different context that Isaac picked up on, seeing his father worship God faithfully and offer these sacrifices. It was something that was instilled in him. I remember when I first started coming to BCS over a decade ago, I was a heathen. I cussed like a sailor, and when I first started coming, I would go play basketball with John and Regis and Chris and all these guys, and I picked up very quickly that they did not cuss, and that was foreign to me. played football at A&M, and Gabe can attest the locker room is not the best place for soft ears to be, but there was a lot of language in my mind, in my mouth that I used that was not used around the people that I was around. And so whether it was the right reason that I curved my language around them or not is beyond the point. I was immature. I was not a Christian. I was trying to learn and figure out how I needed to be faithful to God. I didn't know that at the time, but as I matured in my faith, that caused me, seeing their example and the fact that they didn't do it and it was important to them not to do it, that it was going to cause me to change my mind and my language in doing so. And then as I matured and learned, okay, I know that God doesn't want us to sin. I know we don't want profane things coming out of our mouth and being defiled and impure and all those things that come with knowledge. But at the time, immature, especially in light of what we're talking about, children are very impressionable. They can pick up on when we're here, and we're here every Sunday, and the impact that makes on us. Look over in Deuteronomy chapter 31, and we'll see that a lot of these things, a lot of these principles and examples that we see in the life of Abraham and his sons and how they were raised up are going to end up being part of the law of Moses in expectation in the form of a literal law instead of things that they were required to do through Abraham wanting them to be pleasing unto God, but in fact it would become actual law. In Deuteronomy chapter 31 and verse 12, gather the people together, men and women and children, and thy stranger that is within thy gates, that they may hear and that they may learn and fear the Lord your God and observe to do all the works of his law, and that their children which have not known anything may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land whither you go over Jordan to possess it. And so we'll see that in Joshua chapter 8 and verse 35, after they destroyed Ai, it would talk about that Joshua got up and read in the and there was nothing in the book that he did not read and read in front of the women and men and children. And so the point being is they see those things and they learn that there is a reverence expected and associated with God for what he's done for us, and that being part of that. There's no better place for them to be tonight than here, to be in Bible class, and when we come together in here to worship, there's no better place, no better way to impress on our children the importance of being faithful to God than in the assembling with the church. So back to the context in Genesis chapter 22, something I had never really considered till I started doing this. We always look at it from the faithfulness of Abraham, which certainly was something that I would not want to have to be called to do. But something I had never thought about was from the perspective, the perception of Isaac and the feeling he would have had towards his father after that situation and after those events on Mount Moriah where he was to the point that he was going to kill him. And this is probably something they discussed at a future point in time, but the faithful example that he saw of his father that was willing to kill him, and also the faithfulness of God supplying him a lamb or a ram caught in the bush in lieu of Isaac, because of the faithfulness of Abraham, and carrying out that to that point was something that would probably stick with him forever and making a huge impact on his life, especially being a spiritually minded person as he moves forward and as he matured and got older. He was a young boy, probably a teenager at this point in time, maybe younger, and he saw that his father was about to kill him because God told him to sacrifice him, and then he was to the point of doing so, and God provided him a substitute for him, so that he, because of his faithfulness and as a reward for Abram proving his faith to God. Look over in Hebrews chapter 11. This one thing I wanted to bring up more in light of Abraham's faith, but something to consider. We talked about a few weeks ago when we were looking at Genesis chapter 6 and Noah and the call to build the ark. And again, a little bit of speculation, but nothing to prove otherwise, is there's the potential that it had never rained at that point in time in Genesis 6. We read in chapter 2 that a mist would come up from the ground and water the plants and the herbs and things of that nature. And so look in chapter 11, verse 17. Hebrews 11, verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it is said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. So the reason, or part of the reason that Abraham was willing to do that was because it said he was accounting to God that he was able to raise up Isaac from the dead if he had to go through to the point of killing him, which I think he full well intended till the angel of the Lord called unto him to stop. But the point I wanted to bring up, and something just to consider, is how much greater faith he had. We get into the New Testament, we have several examples, and even with Elisha and resurrecting people from the dead. To this point in time, we have no indication or record that anyone had ever been raised from the dead in any capacity. And so it was the same we looked at in Genesis 6, that it potentially had never rained. It's very likely that it had never been a resurrection of anyone to this point in time in the book of Genesis. And yet Abraham's faith was so strong and his trustworthiness in God was so strong that he was willing to kill his son because he knew his faith was that strong in God that he knew that God was able to raise up his son. And so it made me think about the responsibility we have, both to one another, but especially as parents to our children every day. We may not have that specific scenario where God tests us to sacrifice our kids as Abraham did, but we do have every day where God tests us and tries us to prove our faith to him over and over. And so are we like Abraham, giving our children a solid biblical precedent, a foundation of spiritual mindedness, or are we compromising? I think about people that allow their kids to miss worship on Sundays for sporting events or dance class or whatever the case may be. And so is it going to stick with your children more that you require them to miss those things from the get-go, and they have that lifestyle, that precedent set forth as they proceed in their life and get older and fully understand and appreciate you for that? Or are they going to remember more when you compromise? Say, well, we don't have to go this Sunday when you have tournaments, but we'll go here and we'll go there. We'll go next Sunday. And so a compromising, unfaithful mindset is not a faithful mindset to God. Going here and there is not what God's called us to do. He's called us to be faithful in all things. Flip over to Philippians chapter 3. And again, this applies certainly to one another, to the world around us, our example in general. But are we setting forth a faithful precedent with those around us, namely our children, with the impressionable state that they're in, that we're not going to compromise God's will for secular things, whether no matter how fun they think they be, no matter how mad they may be, they're in a point in time where they're learning and they're going to appreciate that and learn those things and are much more likely to be faithful in the long run if we're doing those things early on in life, as opposed to trying to allow them to get away with some of those things, and as they get older and you realize it's starting to impact them and they're being worldly, and then you try to correct those things, then it's too late. You have to do those things from the beginning before they get that worldly mindset that the world says all those things are okay to do. That's what we have to do, instead of parents saying, no, we're not going to do that, and them just not having tournaments and things of that nature on Sundays. But now look in Philippians chapter 3. Let's read verse 15 through 17. Let us therefore, as many as be perfect, be thus minded. Anything ye be otherwise minded, God shall reveal even this unto you. Nevertheless, whereto we have already attained, let us walk by the same rule. That's the word canon, where we get the word canon for the Bible, a standard. Let us walk by the same standard, and let us mind the same thing. Brethren, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk so as ye have us for an ensample. So most times when we talk about marking or spying out someone, we go to Romans chapter 16, verse 17 and 18, talking about mark those that cause division, mark those that teach contrary doctrines, mark false teachers, which we are certainly supposed to do. But in this context, Paul's telling them to mark those that walk as you have for an example. And I think specific in this context, he's likely talking about the elders and deacons that he references at the beginning of the book in his introduction. But a faithful member, if you're an immature Christian, a college student, a young high school age Christian, or an immature Christian in the faith that's 70 years old, we need to make sure that we are marking, we are spying out, we are looking to faithful people as our example. And what better example, what better opportunity do we have than as parents to set forth that precedent and that example as faithful parents to our children, especially while they're at a young age. Anybody have any comments or questions before we proceed into the actual chapters Terrence wanted me to cover tonight? All right, if you'll flip over to Genesis chapter 24, we will proceed. I'm going to have to summarize some of these passages a little bit, but we get into Genesis chapter 24, and we'll read verses 1 through 5. And Abraham was old and well stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said unto his eldest servant of his house that ruled over all that he had, Put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and I will make thee swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell. But thou shalt go unto my country and to my kindred, and take a wife unto my son Isaac. And the servant said unto him, Peradventure the woman will not be willing to follow me into this land. Must needs I bring thy son again unto the land from whence thou camest. And Abraham said unto him, Beware that thou bring not my son thither again. The Lord God of heaven, which took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and which spake unto me, that sware unto me, saying, Unto thy seed will I give this land. He shall send his angel before thee, and thou shalt take a wife unto my son from thence. So here we have Abraham getting older in life, understanding the importance of a faithful spouse. Terrence talked about it in Genesis chapter 6 in reference to the sons of God marrying those women of the world, the daughters of the world, and the wickedness that would ensue with that commingling of spiritually minded people and earthly, worldly minded, corrupted minded people, and that the corruption overcame the sons of God, those that had began to call on God in the end of Genesis chapter 4. And it caused the whole world except Noah and his family to be in wickedness. They found grace in the sight of God. And so Abraham understood the importance of setting his son. He's getting to the point where he's nearing his death, and he's going to set in order his house. And one of the mindset of a faithful man is to make sure that his son, especially being the son of promise and the one that who the seed blessing, the blessing of the nation, seed promise, nation promise, and the land promise would go through, he was going to ensure that his servant found a woman of his kindred, a woman that was going to set him up and be a faithful wife unto him and help him to be a spiritually minded man and to continue that seed as they proceeded on in life. If you look in verse 24, so the servant's going to go, he's going to find this well, and he prays to God that if the lady that you want, or the girl that you want Isaac to marry, not only should she offer me water, but if she offers to water my camels, I pray that that's the one that you want to appoint to Isaac to wife, and that is Rebekah, who is in verse 15, And it came to pass before he had done speaking that, behold, Rebekah came out, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother. And so this is Abraham's great niece. And so this is of the family of Abraham. This is what he wanted to go find, one of his kindred in his land. And she is going to do exactly what the servant prayed for. So starting in verse 24, she's going to take him home, and the servant is going to rehearse what happened, Abraham sending him, and the call for him to find a wife of his kindred. And in doing so, he's going to elaborate that to his family. He's going to tell them about the prayer that he made to God, and that whoever offered to water his camels would be the one that he was appointed to take back for Isaac. So in verse 67 of this chapter, they in fact are going to marry. She's going to agree to do so based upon the blessings that this man brought up in verse 35. And the Lord hath blessed my master greatly, and he's become great, and hath given him flocks and herds and silver and gold and men servants and maid servants and camels and asses. And Sarah my master's wife bare a son to my master when he was old, and unto him hath he given all that he hath. And so understanding the importance of marrying one of a faithful nature and of his own tribe, as opposed to the Canaanite women that he had grown accustomed to seeing their unfaithfulness and their lack of any sort of moral fiber, if you will, has caused him to send his servant elsewhere to go and draw of his own house one for his son to marry. Understand the importance of that promise and the carrying on out of it. So chapter 25, we're going to come to the death of Abraham. So if you look in verse 5 and 6, Genesis 25 verses 5 and 6. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac, and unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward unto the east country. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 160. So we see that prior to his death, he again, the most important thing, not just giving him all that he had physically, as he was the son of promise, he was the one that received the blessings of Abraham and the inheritance, but also setting forth that lineage that was going to carry on out a faithfulness with the son of promise and a faithful woman. So he sets his house in order. He even gives them, the sons and children of his concubines, he gives them gifts and sends them away. But of the bulk of his substance, the important things of his life, he gave to his son Isaac. So in chapter 25, verse 12 through 18, we actually get the lineage of Ishmael. This is a short little snippet here. We're not going to read that for the sake of time. But if you look in verse 19, we're going to get to the birth of Jacob and Esau with Isaac and Rebekah. So we'll start in verse 19 of chapter 25. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived. So they were 40 years old when he married, and verse 26 would tell us that Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. So she was 60 years old. So one thing, in whether he was praying from the time that they were married, shortly thereafter, or a few years later, but it says that she was barren, she was not able to have children, and so we see Isaac was a prayerful man. He was persistent in prayer and praying to God that he would open her womb, that she would be able to bear children because of her sadness for not being able to do so, and it says that God entreated of him, and his wife Rebekah conceived. So in verse 22, the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. So she's struggling physically greatly with this pregnancy, and so she's going to inquire of the Lord, pray to the Lord as to what's going on, why this is such a bad situation for her during this pregnancy. In verse 23, and the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the people shall be stronger, the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. So she's going to realize part of the reason she's having the issues with her is because she's having twins, and then God is going to elaborate that there's 2 manner of people inside of her, one stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. So this is obviously in reference to Jacob and Esau, and the reference to the nations, or the manner of people, the 2 manner of people is not dealing with them physically and how that they were literally going to be as boys, their descendants, and God's foreknowledge, knowing of what was going to happen with them as they got older, who would be faithful and who would rebel. That is what is being discussed. If you look over in Romans chapter 9, Romans chapter 9, Paul is going to address this in regards to the promises not being made to physical Israel, and that it was a matter of faithfulness to God. It's not going to be based on a physical descent. If you look in verse 6, not as though the word of God hath taken none effect, for they are not all Israel which are of Israel. So the promise is not just made to physical Israel, but those that live by faith, as the church is called the Israel of God in Galatians chapter 6. Neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they all children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called. That is, they which are the children of the flesh, these are not the children of God, but the children of the promise are counted for seed. For this is the word of promise, at this time will I come, and Sarah shall have a son. And not only this, but when Rebekah also had conceived by one, even by her father Isaac, for the children not yet being born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. So his selection was not based on anything that they had done. It just says that in the womb they had neither done good nor evil. We know children are not born into sin, but rather the foreknowledge of God, understanding what would transpire as they grew older, and we'll look at some of that here in just a second. But God knew beforehand that each boy, each nation, which direction they would go, and who would serve God and who would not. In verse 12, it was said unto her, the elder shall serve the younger, and it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. And again, that's not talking about the physical child, that's talking about the people, and we see that in the book of Amos and the destruction of the Edomites being prophesied about there. The book of Obadiah specifically is about the destruction of the Edomites and the fact that they didn't help the Israelites. They laughed, they cheered as they were persecuted for those around them, and they also helped in those things. And so it's talking about the lineage, the transpiration of these people and the wickedness and how they would come up after them. And we're going to see that obviously results back to, or refers back to when they were alive, but it's going to carry on much further than that. And it was going to be Jacob that was going to rule over Esau, and the elder served the younger, as God promised her in that context. So that may be, if you look back in Genesis chapter 25, in verse 27 and 28, and the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So perhaps that's why Rebekah loved Jacob more, because she understood that it does not seem that Isaac was around when God told her about the two nations, the two people in her womb, and that the elder was going to serve the younger. So perhaps she understood he was going to be the one through who the promises, the seed blessing would carry on through, would be through Jacob. And that's why she loved Jacob more. So very quickly through the end of this, we know the story of Jacob being out, Esau being out in the field hunting and coming back faint and famished, and Jacob making a pot of lentils, and Jacob comes to him Esau comes to Jacob to get some of this food. Verse 32, and Esau said, behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall this birthright do to me? Jacob says, give me your birthright, and I'll give you this soup. And Jacob said, swear to me this day, and he sware unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way, and thus Esau despised his birthright. So we see here that this is the beginning of his rebellion. God has, in a sense, tested Esau to the point of where he's faint, he's famished. And in Matthew chapter 16, verse 26, what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his soul? What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? And we see Esau did it to the point of he exalted his physical life and giving up his birthright and the blessings associated therewith for a bowl of soup, because he was physically hungry and could not control himself. And so this is going to be the beginning of a rebellious lifestyle for Esau as we proceed. But he's going to rebel against God by taking this soup without understanding the full capacity. But we'll see that this is going to be a lifestyle. And again, don't mistake God's foreknowledge and him understanding what they would do, what they would be, what their lifestyles would be as God, the false doctrine of predestination, as he chose Jacob and he chose Esau to destruction. He understood what was going to happen to them. God's not a respecter of persons, Acts 10, 34 and 35, but he understood what they were going to be and who was going to be rebellious and who was going to be faithful to him. It's important to note there he also says he despised his birthright as we progress into chapter 27. So very quickly, chapter 26, we'll read verses 1 through 5. And there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Israel went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. And the Lord appeared unto him and said, go not down into Egypt, and dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee. For unto thee and unto thy seed I will give all these countries, and will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because that Abraham obeyed my voice, and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes and my laws, and Isaac dwelt at Gerar. And so we see here he's testing Isaac. He's telling him, look, all these blessings that are associated with are going to come if you stay here. Don't go down into Egypt. I know the famine's bad. Stay here, and I'm going to provide all these things for you. And we see Isaac's faithfulness and obedience there. So the end of chapter 26, we'll skip over some of that. It basically is an interaction between Abimelech and his men, and trying to get rid of Isaac and his family, his servants, because they were mightier than them. They were worried, and in verse 28, he's going to come back to him and says, we see that the Lord was with you, and we want to make a covenant with these. So at the end of this, in verse 34 and 35, and Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri, and the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. So Esau is going to continue that lifestyle of rebellion. Whether in this context it was intentional or unintentional. If you look over in chapter 28, he's going to intentionally do it even further in chapter 28 because of the situation that transpires in chapter 27 when Isaac gives his blessing to Jacob. Verse 8 of Genesis 28, and Esau, seeing that the daughter of Canaan pleased not Isaac his father, then went Esau unto Ishmael, and took unto the wives which he had Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebajoth, to be wife. And so he already had wives that were not of his family, not of his kin, and he saw that it displeased his parents, and he was going to add more to that solely for the purpose of rebelling against his parents. So look in chapter 27. Again, this is a passage where we should all be familiar with. Jacob, as Abraham did, is to the point of he's old and getting older in life. He wants to set his house in order. And so he calls Esau, his eldest son, to bless him. He says, go into the field, bring me some venison, cook it, bring it back, and then I will bless thee. And so we know Rebekah is going to catch wind of this. She calls Jacob. They go into a great deceptive plan together to trick Isaac and to make him think that Jacob is Esau. They put hair on his hands of a goat. He goes and gets 2 goats, and she cooks them for him to give to Isaac. And so they go into this great plan to make Isaac deceived, and so that he's going to give that blessing unto Jacob instead of Esau. And so if you look in chapter 27, verse 17 and 18, and she gave the savory meat and the bread which she had prepared in the hand of her son Jacob, and he came unto his father and said, my father, and said, here am I, who art thou, my son? Jacob said unto his father, I am Esau, thy firstborn. I have done according as thou badest me. Arise, I pray thee, sit and eat of my venison, that thy soul may bless me. So Jacob and his mother tricked his father in this context. Galatians 6:9 tells us that what a man soweth, so shall he reap. And so there's things in life that we may do that we don't have immediate consequences, but further we're going to reap those things. And so Jacob would get this back, right? When Joseph his brother sell Joseph into slavery and go back to Jacob and deceive him into thinking that Joseph had been dead all this time. And so he was going to have to deal with those consequences of that. So verse 34 through 38, and when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried in a great exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, bless me, even me also, O my father. And he said, thy brother came with subtlety, and hath taken away thy blessing. And he said, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing, and said, hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said unto Esau, behold, I have made him thy lord, and all his brethren have I given for him for servants, and with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do now unto thee, my son? And Esau said unto his father, hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And so he's going to return to find out exactly what had just happened and the fact that his blessing was given away. So remember, he despised his birthright. So part of the birthright was you received the blessing of the firstborn, the blessing of these promises. And so the fact that he despised that in that context, yet he wanted the blessing, goes to show us how many people of the world do things like that today, right? They don't want religion, they don't want the church, but they want the blessings of God. And we know that those things are mutually exclusive, right? You have to be in Christ, you have to be in the church to receive the blessings of the Father, and in the same way there, for him to have those blessings and receive the blessings that the Father was going to give to him, Isaac would have had to come at the result of having his birthright. In chapter 28, we're going to stop there. We'll pick back up the next time. I'll teach next week. We'll do part 1 of the life of Jacob. But Esau is going to be very angry to the point he wants to kill Jacob, and his mother and father are going to send him into Padan Aram and give him that same charge and warning to not take to wife of those daughters of the children of Canaan. Any comments or questions before we conclude? I know that was a lot, but we'll pick back up in chapter 28 next week. Thanks.